One weapon turned farmers into kings, shattered knights in armor, and made entire armies run at the sight of it. Forget everything you think you know about ancient warfare, because behind every legend, there was a spear, and behind every spear, a revolution waiting to happen. But which one holds the title of deadliest? The answer might just change everything you thought you knew about history's most dangerous battles. Let's start with a weapon so effective it dominated battlefields for over 500 years. We're talking about the Macedonian sarissa. But here's the thing. It wasn't the length that made it deadly. It was something far more psychological. Picture this. You're a Persian soldier, 330 BC. You see a wall of bronze shields approaching. Nothing unusual. But then, from 20 feet away, twice the distance of any spear you've ever seen, hundreds of bronze points start emerging from that wall like a porcupine from hell. Your sword? Useless. Your spear? Too short by 12 feet. And here's the genius part. The soldiers holding these 18-foot monsters didn't even need to be that skilled. Philip II of Macedon figured out something revolutionary. If your spear is long enough, coordination beats individual skill every time. The sarissa required 2 hands, which meant smaller shields, but that vulnerability? Completely irrelevant when your enemy can't even get close enough to exploit it. The phalanx formations using sarissas became so dominant that Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world with them. A 22,000-man army defeated a 100,000-strong Persian force at Gaugamela. But here's what made it truly deadly. The front 5 rows of the phalanx could angle their sarissas forward simultaneously. That's 5 layers of death coming at you at once. No army had an answer for it. Until they did. And that answer involved a spear that was actually shorter, but killed in a way the Macedonians never saw coming. But we'll get to that in a moment, because first, you need to understand the one weakness in the sarissa that led to its downfall. See, the sarissa had one fatal flaw: tight spaces. At the Battle of Cynocephaly in 197 BC, Roman legions forced the phalanx onto uneven terrain. The 18-foot spears became tangled, uncoordinated. Soldiers couldn't maneuver. And that's when Rome revealed their counterweapon. But that's actually our second spear, and what it could do will make the sarissa look like a pool noodle. But before we get to Rome's answer, let me ask you something. What if I told you the sarissa wasn't even the longest spear ever used in combat? There was one that stretched even further, but it was so impractical that only one civilization was crazy enough to use it effectively. Alright, number 2, the Roman pilum. Now, I know what you're thinking. Rome's spear was shorter than Macedonia's. How is it more deadly? That's exactly what the Macedonians thought. Right before their shields became completely useless. The pilum wasn't designed to kill you. Not directly, anyway. It was designed to do something far more sinister. Make you defenseless right before the real killing started. Here's how it worked. You're a Celtic warrior, shield raised, ready to meet the Roman advance. Suddenly, from 30 yards out, thousands of these weighted javelins arc through the sky. You raise your shield, smart move. The pilum hits it. But here's where the genius begins. The pilum doesn't bounce off. Its iron shank, nearly 3 feet long, punctures through your wooden shield. The soft metal then bends from the weight of the wooden shaft. Now you've got a 6-foot pole hanging off your shield, dragging it down, making it impossible to use. You have 3 options. Hold onto a useless, weighted down shield, waste precious seconds trying to remove a bent iron rod from wood, or drop your shield entirely. All 3 options? Fatal. Because now the Roman infantry closes in with their gladi, short swords perfect for close combat, and you're completely exposed. Julius Caesar's legions used this tactic to devastating effect. At Alesia, 60,000 Romans defeated a combined Gallic force of over 300,000. The pilum volley broke their shield walls before the fighting even started. But the psychological warfare was even darker. Imagine watching your expensive shield, maybe passed down through generations, become a liability in seconds. Some warriors would panic, others freeze, trying to save their shield. Fatal hesitation. The Romans even designed the pilum so the soft iron shank couldn't be thrown back. Battlefield recycling? Not today. However, there was one spear that the Romans themselves feared. One weapon that could actually counter the pilum's tactical advantage. And it came from a place Rome spent centuries trying to conquer, because the warriors who wielded it were so effective that Roman generals would rather retreat than face them head-on. But here's what's wild. This next spear wasn't made by a sophisticated empire. It was perfected by tribal warriors who turned their hunting weapon into something so lethal that it changed the entire military doctrine of southern Africa. And the innovation behind it? So simple it's brilliant. But before that, if you love discovering hidden weapons that rewrote history, hit subscribe now. It would just take a click, but it can make my day. Number 3. The Zulu Ikla. And I'm putting this at number 3 because this spear revolutionized warfare in a way that most people have never heard about. The name Ikla comes from the sucking sound it made when pulled out of a body. Yeah, let that sink in. Before 1816, Zulu warriors used long-throwing spears called assegais. Standard weapons, nothing special. Then a military genius named Shaka Zulu had an idea that his commanders thought was insane. What if we stop throwing our spears altogether? His innovation was brutal in its simplicity. He shortened the blade to 18 inches, widened it, and added a longer, sturdier shaft. But here's the key. He changed how it was used entirely. The Ikla wasn't for throwing. It was for close-quarters stabbing, and Shaka combined it with a large cowhide shield called an ishlangu. Here's the tactic that made it unstoppable. Zulu warriors would charge in tight formations. The shield hooks your opponent's shield to the left, exposing their entire right side. The Ikla stabs upward under the ribcage, directly into vital organs. One thrust, one kill. Pull out, that sucking sound, move to the next enemy. Shaka drilled his warriors relentlessly in this technique. They could execute it in perfect synchronization. Entire enemy formations would collapse in minutes. The psychological impact was massive. Traditional African warfare involved throwing spears from a distance, relatively low casualties. Shaka's method was personal, brutal, and devastatingly efficient. Battles that used to last hours with minimal deaths now ended in minutes with complete annihilation. In 1818, at the Battle of Jeekly Hill, Shaka's 500 warriors faced 5,000 enemies. Using the Ikla and their new tactics, they won decisively. Within a decade, the Zulu kingdom grew from a small tribe to an empire controlling 11,500 square miles. When the British Empire finally invaded Zululand in 1879, they were shocked. At the Battle of Isandlwana, 20,000 Zulu warriors equipped primarily with Iklas defeated 1,800 British soldiers armed with rifles and artillery. It's one of the worst defeats in British military history. The British soldiers reported the Zulus closing the distance so quickly that their rifles barely mattered. Once the Zulus got close, the Ikla's short range became an advantage. British bayonets were too long for the chaotic close combat, while the Ikla was perfect for it. But here's what's interesting. The Ikla succeeded because it went against conventional wisdom. Shorter wasn't supposed to be better. Close combat wasn't supposed to beat ranged weapons. Yet it did. Which brings us to a spear that also defied logic. One that combined multiple deadly features into a single weapon that became the signature tool of an elite warrior class. And this spear was so personally important to its wielders that losing it in battle was considered worse than death itself. In fact, there's documented cases of samurai committing ritual suicide rather than returning home without this weapon. But what made it so psychologically powerful wasn't just cultural. It was because of 3 specific design features that made it deadlier than any sword these warriors carried. Number 4, the Japanese yari. And before you say, wait, aren't samurai known for swords? Exactly. That's the misconception. On the battlefield, the yari was the primary weapon. The katana was backup. Here's something that will blow your mind. In large-scale samurai battles, the yari accounted for roughly 80% of casualties. Not the sword. The spear. The yari had 3 components that made it lethal. A straight blade ranging from 8 to 14 inches, often with secondary side blades forming a cross shape, mounted on a shaft that could be anywhere from 6 to 20 feet long depending on the warrior's role. But the real innovation was in how it was made. Japanese swordsmiths applied their legendary blade folding techniques to create yari points. We're talking about spear tips with the same quality as katana blades, differential hardening, razor-sharp edges, and tips that could punch through armor. Here's where it gets interesting. Samurai were trained in over 450 different yari techniques. Let me give you perspective. European pike formations mostly thrust forward. That's it. Japanese yari practitioners could thrust, sweep, hook, parry, disarm, and even use the shaft for strikes. The cross-bladed yari, called a jumanji yari, was particularly nasty. You could stab someone, then twist and pull. The side blades would catch on armor, clothing, or flesh, causing massive tearing wounds. Pulling the spear out would often be more damaging than the initial thrust. At the Battle of Shizugatake in 1583, a samurai named Fukushima Masanori reportedly killed over 17 enemy soldiers with his yari before his army even engaged. The weapon's versatility meant a skilled user could control space against multiple opponents simultaneously. But here's the psychological element. Samurai culture emphasized individual combat prowess. Your yari was an extension of your honor. Many yari had names, family histories, were considered heirlooms. Losing your yari was shameful because it meant you failed in combat, the most important arena for a samurai. This created warriors who were psychologically bonded to their weapons in a way that increased combat effectiveness. They trained with the same yari for years, understanding its exact weight, balance, and reach instinctively. The yari remained the primary battlefield weapon in Japan until firearms became widespread in the late 16th century. Even then, yari formations continued to be used effectively in combination with arquebusiers. What made the yari number 4 on this list is its combination of craftsmanship and tactical versatility. It wasn't just a tool for killing. It was a refined instrument that required years to master. But there's one spear we haven't talked about yet. One weapon that combined length, killing power, and tactical innovation in a way that literally defined an era of warfare. This spear was so effective that it remained the dominant infantry weapon across 3 continents for over 300 years. And the formations built around it were so powerful that they could break cavalry charges, devastate infantry, and even pose a threat to early firearms. In fact, the military doctrine built around this spear was so successful that even after gunpowder changed warfare forever, commanders still included these formations in their armies. Because when used correctly, this spear could do something none of the others could. It could hold ground against literally any threat. Number 1. The Swiss-German pike. And I'm placing this at number 1 because no other spear in history shaped military tactics for as long or as completely as this weapon. The pike was a monster, 18 to 22 feet of ash wood tipped with a steel point. It required 2 hands, made you vulnerable, and was exhausting to hold. So why did it dominate European warfare from the 14th to the 17th century? Because it made infantry, peasants, farmers, common men, capable of defeating armored knights. And that changed everything. Before the pike, cavalry ruled battlefields. A mounted knight in full armor was almost unstoppable. Infantry would break and run when cavalry charged. It was just what happened. Then Swiss mercenaries perfected the pike square formation, and suddenly the entire medieval social order was at risk. Here's how it worked. Imagine a square formation, 100 men on each side. Each man holds a pike. The front ranks point their pikes forward at chest height. The ranks behind angle theirs over the shoulders of the men in front. You end up with a moving forest of steel points, 10 to 15 rows deep. Now imagine you're a mounted knight. You've trained since childhood. Your armor costs more than a village. Your horse is a destrier bred for war. You charge at this formation. But your horse isn't stupid. It sees a wall of spikes and it stops. No animal will impale itself voluntarily. You can spur it, yell, beat it, doesn't matter. The horse refuses. And now you're stationary, surrounded by pike points that can punch through armor joints. Multiple pikes thrust at you simultaneously. You die. Your expensive armor, your years of training, your noble blood, none of it matters. At the Battle of Morgarten in 1315, 1,500 Swiss infantry defeated 9,000 Austrian knights and infantry. The pike square held firm, the cavalry broke, and Switzerland effectively won its independence. At the Battle of Nancy in 1477, Swiss pike formations destroyed Charles the Bold's army so completely that Burgundy ceased to exist as an independent state. The pike square became the standard infantry formation across Europe. Spain developed the tercio, combining pikemen with arquebusiers. The formation was so effective it remained dominant for 200 years. But here's the real genius. The pike democratized warfare. You didn't need years of expensive training. Drill a peasant for a few months in formation discipline, give him a pike, and he could kill a knight. The aristocratic monopoly on military power was broken. The pike's dominance led to an arms race in warfare doctrine. How do you beat a pike square? You can't cavalry charge it. Infantry without pikes gets destroyed. So you develop combined arms tactics, use arquebusiers or musketeers to shoot at the pike square from a distance, then attack the flanks with cavalry while the formation is disrupted. This evolution led directly to modern military doctrine. The importance of combined arms, overlapping fields of fire, unit cohesion, all of these concepts were developed in response to the tactical problem of the pike square. The pike remained militarily relevant even into the early 18th century. At the Battle of Killiecrankie in 1689, Highland Scottish forces using pikes and broadswords actually defeated a Williamite army with superior firearms, though that was one of the last major victories by pike-armed forces. What makes the pike the deadliest spear in history isn't its individual lethality. Other spears might kill more efficiently one-on-one. It's the fact that the pike changed warfare itself. It ended the age of cavalry dominance. It shifted military power from aristocrats to common soldiers. It led directly to the professional standing armies that define modern warfare. The pike took the concept of the spear, humanity's oldest weapon, and evolved it into something that literally restructured society. Nobles couldn't maintain power through martial superiority anymore. Nations needed disciplined infantry, not just wealthy knights. The pike square was the bridge between medieval and modern warfare. And that's why it's number one. Not because it was the sharpest, or the longest, or even the most innovative design, but because no other spear changed the course of human history quite like it did. 5 spears, 5 revolutions in warfare. If you want more deadly weapons from history broken down like this, subscribe. More coming soon.